800 meters? Nobody can hit targets at that distance. The male soldiers laughed as they moved the targets impossibly far. They thought it was the perfect prank on the quiet female soldier. Then she raised her rifle, took one shot, and hit all 3 targets. The technique she used? Impossible unless you're trained in something they'd never heard of. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe stories about hidden skills and underestimated heroes deserve to be told, please consider subscribing to our channel. Camp Harrison sprawled across the Nevada desert like a small city, its training facilities housing over 4,000 soldiers preparing for deployment. The morning sun's long shadows across the rifle ranges where Specialist Maria Santos, 24 years old, 5 feet 4 inches with dark hair always pulled back in regulation style, quietly went about her duties. Maria had been at Camp Harrison for 8 months, and in all that time, she had spoken only when necessary. While other soldiers joked and bonded during downtime, she preferred to stay in the background, cleaning weapons, organizing equipment, and maintaining the ranges with meticulous care. "There goes the ghost again," Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison called out as Maria walked past carrying a cleaning kit. Morrison was a big man from Texas, 6 feet 2 inches and built like a linebacker, with a voice that carried across the entire range. 8 months, and I still don't think I've heard her say more than 10 words. His buddy, Staff Sergeant Mike Chun, laughed as he adjusted his rifle scope. "Maybe she's mute. Would explain why she's always cleaning our gear instead of talking." Corporal Danny Walsh, a cocky 22-year-old from Boston, chimed in with his characteristic smirk. "Nah, she's just scared. Probably never fired a weapon in her life. That's why she volunteers for cleanup duty." The group of 6 soldiers had formed an unofficial clique, united by their shared experience in previous deployments and their dismissive attitude toward anyone they perceived as weak. They saw Maria's quiet demeanor as proof that she didn't belong in their world of combat readiness and military precision. Maria continued her work, methodically cleaning each rifle in the rack. Her movements were practiced. She handled each weapon with a familiarity that spoke of extensive experience. But the soldiers didn't notice these details. They only saw a small, quiet woman who seemed to prefer menial tasks to the glory of marksmanship training. "Hey, Santos," Morrison called out, his voice carrying that particular tone soldiers used when they were about to cause trouble. "You want to try some real shooting today?" Maria looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her dark eyes meeting Morrison's briefly before she returned to her work. "I'm good, Sergeant. Thank you." The response drew chuckles from the group. Walsh nudged Chun with his elbow. "See? I told you she was scared. Probably can't even hit the broadside of a barn." "Come on, Santos," Chun added, his tone mockingly encouraging. "We're heading out to the 200-meter range. You can't clean weapons forever. Eventually, you got to learn to use them." Maria continued her cleaning without responding. She had learned long ago that engaging with this type of behavior only made it worse. Better to stay invisible, to let them underestimate her, to avoid drawing the kind of attention that led to uncomfortable questions about her background. But Morrison wasn't finished. He stood up from his shooting mat and walked over to where Maria was working. His shadow fell across her workspace as he loomed over her with calculated intimidation. "You know what, Santos? I think it's time you joined the real soldiers for some actual training." "Range Master Wilson," he called out to the senior NCO supervising the day's activities. "We want to include Santos in today's marksmanship drill." Range Master Wilson, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of experience, looked up from his clipboard. "Morrison, if Santos wants to participate, she can sign up like everyone else. Don't volunteer people for things." "But Sergeant Wilson," Walsh interjected with fake concern, "we're worried about Santos' readiness. She's been here 8 months, and we've never seen her fire a weapon. What if she gets deployed without proper training?" The comment was designed to put Wilson in a difficult position. As range master, he was responsible for ensuring all soldiers met marksmanship standards. The suggestion that someone under his supervision might be avoiding weapons training was a direct challenge to his authority. Wilson studied Maria for a moment. She continued cleaning the rifle in her hands, her movement steady and unhurried. "Santos," You current on your weapons qualification? Yes, Sergeant. Maria replied quietly. Current through next quarter. See, Morrison said with a grin. That didn't reach his eyes. She's qualified, so there's no reason she can't join us for some advanced training, right? Wilson nodded slowly. Santos, if you want to participate in today's advanced marksmanship training, you're welcome to join. Maria looked up again, this time letting her gaze sweep across the 6 soldiers who were watching her with poorly concealed amusement. She could see the trap being set, could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. They wanted her to fail, wanted to confirm their assumption that she was weak, scared, and out of place. What's the training today? She asked. Long-range precision shooting, Morrison answered, his smile widening. We're working on 400-meter targets today. Challenging stuff. You sure you're up for it? Maria considered this. 400 meters was indeed challenging for many soldiers, requiring skill, concentration, and understanding of wind patterns and bullet drop. It was exactly the kind of test designed to expose weaknesses and separate the skill from the merely adequate. I can try, she said simply. The group exchanged glances, barely suppressing their excitement. Walsh actually rubbed his hands together in anticipation. This is going to be good, he whispered to Chun. 30 minutes later, the 7 soldiers had assembled at the long-range facility. The 400-meter targets were set up in standard formation, 3 steel plates arranged in a triangle pattern. Each soldier would fire 10 rounds, and scores would be tallied based on hits and accuracy. Morrison went first, his performance solid but not spectacular. 7 hits out of 10 rounds, with 3 shots grouping near the center of the target. Respectable for the distance, but nothing extraordinary. Chun followed with 6 hits. Walsh managed 7. The others performed similarly. Adequate shooting that met military standards but didn't exceed them. Then it was Maria's turn. She approached the firing line with the same quiet demeanor she brought to everything else. Her rifle was a standard M4 carbine, identical to what the others had used. She made no adjustments to the scope, didn't test the wind with grass or makeshift indicators, didn't go through the elaborate preparation rituals the others had performed. Remember, Santos, Morrison called out with false encouragement. Take your time. Don't be afraid to miss a few. We all started somewhere. Maria settled into position, her movements economical and precise. As she prepared to fire, Wilson noticed something the others had missed. Her shooting stance was textbook perfect. Her grip, her breathing, her body position, everything indicated extensive training and experience. But before Wilson could comment, Morrison made his move. You know what? Morrison announced loudly. Let's make this more interesting. Santos, you're always talking about how we should challenge ourselves, right? Maria had never said any such thing, but she didn't correct him. So let's give you a real challenge, Morrison continued, signaling to his friends. Walsh, Chun, help me move these targets back. Back to where? Wilson asked, frowning. 800 meters. Morrison said with a grin. If Santos is really ready for advanced training, she should be able to handle extreme long-range shooting. Wilson's frown deepened. Morrison, 800 meters is expert-level distance. That's sniper training range. Exactly. Walsh chimed in. Perfect test of skill. Besides, if she misses, no harm done. If she hits something, we'll know she's actually got talent. The suggestion was transparently designed to humiliate Maria. 800 meters was indeed sniper-level distance, requiring not just skill, but specialized training and equipment. With a standard M4 and basic optics, hitting targets at that range was extremely difficult even for experienced marksmen. Santos, Wilson said, turned to her. You don't have to accept this. 400 meters is the standard for this exercise. Maria looked out at the range, where the soldiers were already starting to move the targets. She could see the calculation in their movements. The barely contained glee as they set up what they believed would be her public failure. It's fine, Sergeant, she said quietly. I'll take the shot. Morrison's grin widened. Outstanding. You hear that, boys? Santos is up for the challenge. As they repositioned the targets, Chin leaned close to Walsh. This is perfect. She'll miss by a mile, and we'll finally have proof that she doesn't belong here. 800 meters with an M4, Walsh whispered back. Even Morrison couldn't make that shot consistently. She's going to embarrass herself. The targets were now mere dots in the distance, barely visible even with the rifle's scope. Wilson shook his head as he watched the setup. This was beyond challenging. It was approaching impossible. Santos, he said as she prepared to take position, I want you to know that missing at this distance is completely normal. Even experienced snipers struggle with 800-meter shots. Thank you, Sergeant, Maria replied, her voice steady. She settled into position again, this time taking slightly longer to prepare. But what the watching soldiers didn't notice was a subtle change in her demeanor. Her breathing had shifted into a rhythm they hadn't seen before. Her grip on the rifle had adjusted in ways that spoke of training beyond standard military instruction. Take your time, Santos, Morrison called out, his voice dripping with false encouragement. No pressure. Just do your best. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and peered through the scope. The targets were barely visible at this distance. 3 steel plates that looked like specks against the desert backdrop. What happened next would be talked about for years. Maria fired once. The sound echoed across the range, a sharp crack that seemed to hang in the desert air. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The targets were too distant to see impact clearly with the naked eye. Then Wilson, who had been watching through binoculars, slowly lowered them. His face had gone pale. What? Morrison asked, seeing Wilson's expression. Did she miss? Did she even get close? Wilson didn't answer immediately. He raised binoculars again, studying the targets with intense concentration. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She hit all 3 targets. What do you mean, all 3? Chin demanded. She only fired once. Wilson said, his voice growing stronger as impossible reality sank in. She hit all 3 targets with 1 bullet. The group fell silent. Morrison grabbed his own binoculars and trained them on the distant targets. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about ballistics and marksmanship. All 3 steel plates were clearly hit, but the pattern of impacts told a story that seemed impossible. The bullet had struck the first target, ricocheted at a precisely calculated angle to hit the second target, then deflected again to strike the third. That's... Chin started, then stopped. That's not possible. Ricochet ballistics, Wilson said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and recognition. Controlled ricochet shooting. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it executed. Morrison's binoculars trembled slightly in his hands. Who the hell knows how to do that? Wilson turned to look at Maria, who was calmly safing her weapon and preparing to stand up. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not just glanced, but studied her movements, her posture, her handling of the rifle. Santos, he said, his voice different now, carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Maria shouldered her rifle and turned to face the group. For the first time in 8 months, she allowed something beyond quiet compliance to show in her expression. Not arrogance, not triumph, but quiet confidence that transformed her entire presence. Previous assignment, she said simply. What previous assignment? Morrison demanded, his earlier mockery replaced by something approaching desperation. The foundation of his assumptions about Maria had just been shattered, and he was scrambling to understand what he had missed. Maria looked at him calmly. Classified. The single word hit the group like a physical blow. Classified didn't mean she had received advanced training. Classified suggested something far more significant. Specialized units, elite programs, the kind of assignments that didn't appear in normal military records. Wilson stepped closer, his expression intense. Santos, ricochet ballistics isn't standard military training. That's advanced marksmanship technique used by... He stopped, the implication hanging in the air like smoke from the rifle shot. Used by who, Sergeant? Walsh asked, his earlier confidence completely gone. Wilson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Maria's face, looking for confirmation of what he was beginning to suspect. That technique is taught to designated marksmen in specialized units. Long-range reconnaissance. Special operations. The soldiers looked at each other, then back at Maria, the small, quiet woman who had been cleaning their weapons and staying in the background suddenly seemed different. Not physically. She hadn't changed, but their perception of her had shifted dramatically. Maria, Morrison said, and for the first time, he used her first name with something approaching respect. What unit were you with before this? Maria considered her response carefully. She had spent 8 months building a careful facade of invisibility, avoiding exactly this kind of attention, but the shot had been necessary. Sometimes you had to reveal a small piece of the truth to maintain the larger deception. 75th Ranger Regiment, she said quietly. 2nd Battalion. The silence that followed was profound. The 75th Ranger Regiment was one of the Army's elite units, known for producing some of the military's most skilled soldiers. Admission to the Rangers required exceptional physical and mental capabilities, and the training was legendary for its difficulty. Rangers, Chin whispered, the word carrying weight none of them had expected. Wilson nodded slowly, pieces falling into place in his mind. That explains the ricochet technique. Rangers receive advanced marksmanship training that goes beyond standard military instruction. But why are you here? Walsh asked, confusion evident in his voice. Why aren't you with your Ranger unit? Maria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of memory that suggested painful history. Medical reassignment, she said. Injury ended my deployment status. It was a careful truth, revealing just enough to satisfy their curiosity without exposing the full complexity of her situation. She had indeed been injured, but not in the way they would assume. The injury had been to her cover, not her body, when a mission had gone sideways and her identity had been compromised. Morrison looked down at his rifle, then back at Maria. For the first time since she had arrived at Camp Harrison, he seemed uncertain. Santos, Maria, I owe you an apology. We've been treating you like someone who doesn't belong here. Maria finished for him. I know, but you never said anything. You never told us you were a ranger. Maria shouldered her cleaning kit and began walking back toward the equipment storage area. Would it have mattered? She asked over her shoulder. Or would you have found other reasons to prove I didn't measure up? The question hung in the desert air like a challenge none of them could answer honestly. Wilson watched her go, his mind racing through 8 months of observations he hadn't properly processed. The way she handled weapons with unconscious expertise. The way she could field strip and reassemble any rifle in the armory without consulting manuals. The way she moved with economic precision that spoke of extensive training. Sergeant Wilson, Morrison said, his voice subdued, what do we do now? Wilson turned back to the group, studying each face. These were good soldiers, competent and dedicated, but they had just learned a hard lesson about assumptions and respect. Now, he said, you learn that the most dangerous person on any range isn't necessarily the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one you never notice until you need them. Over the next few days, word of Maria's shooting demonstration spread through Camp Harrison like wildfire. The story grew in the telling, as military stories often do, but the essential fact remained unchanged. The quiet female soldier had executed a shooting technique that most of them had never heard of, let alone witnessed. The 6 soldiers who had orchestrated the prank found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Their attempt to humiliate Maria had backfired spectacularly, revealing not her inadequacy, but their own ignorance. Morrison was the first to approach her directly. He found her in the armory 3 days later, performing her usual maintenance duties on the company's weapons. The space was quiet, lit by fluorescent lights that cast everything in stark detail. Santos, he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Can we talk? Maria looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. About what, Sergeant? About the other day. About how we've been treating you. Morrison struggled with words, clearly uncomfortable. We were wrong. I was wrong. Maria continued her work, not making eye contact. You were testing me. I understand. No, Morrison said firmly. We were being assholes. There's a difference. The admission surprised them both. Morrison wasn't known for admitting mistakes or showing vulnerability. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "Why didn't you say you were a ranger?" Maria set down her cleaning rod and finally looked at him directly. "Would you have believed me?" Morrison considered this honestly. "Probably not." "Then you have your answer." Wilson entered the armory, carrying a folder marked with official seals. He nodded to Morrison, then addressed Maria directly. "Santos, I've been reviewing your file. There are some gaps in your service record." Maria's hand stilled on the weapon she was cleaning. "Gaps? Your ranger service shows deployment to Afghanistan, but there's a 6-month period that's listed as medical leave. No details, no explanations." Maria resumed her cleaning, her movements carefully controlled. "Some things are classified above your pay grade, Sergeant." Wilson set the folder on the workbench nearby. "I called a friend at Ranger headquarters. Asked about you specifically." This got Maria's attention. She looked up, and for the first time, Wilson saw something other than calm in her eyes. Not fear, but wariness. "What did they say?" "Officially, you were medically reassigned due to a training injury. Unofficially?" Wilson paused. "My friend said your name was associated with Operation Silent Thunder, but he couldn't discuss details." Morrison frowned. "What's Operation Silent Thunder?" Wilson shook his head. "Classified," but the tone in my friend's voice suggested it was something significant. Maria stood up slowly, setting the cleaned rifle back in its rack. "Sergeant Wilson, with respect, my previous assignments aren't relevant to my current duties." "Maybe not," Wilson agreed, "but that shooting technique you demonstrated, that's not standard ranger training. That's something else entirely." The three of them stood in the armory, surrounded by weapons and the smell of gun oil, each processing different aspects of the revelation. Morrison was grappling with his own behavior and assumptions. Wilson was trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. And Maria was calculating how much truth she could reveal without compromising her current assignment. "The ricochet technique," Wilson continued. "I've only seen references to it in classified training manuals. Specialized marksmanship for unique operational requirements." Maria picked up another rifle and began her cleaning routine. "Some situations require non-standard solutions." "What situations?" Morrison asked. Maria paused in her work, memories flickering behind her eyes. "Situations where you can't take a direct shot, where stealth is more important than power, where one bullet has to do the work of 3 because you won't get a second chance." The specificity of her answer suggested experience, not theory. Wilson and Morrison exchanged glances, both beginning to understand that whatever Maria's real background was, it went far beyond what appeared in her official file. "How many people know this technique?" Wilson asked. "Not many," Maria replied. "It's not something you learn in standard training. It requires," she searched for the right words, "specialized instruction." "From who?" Maria looked at both men, weighing her response. "People who don't exist in official records." The implication was clear, even if the details remained hidden. Maria had received training from individuals or units that operated outside normal military channels, the kind of training associated with operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Over the following weeks, Maria's relationship with her fellow soldiers underwent a gradual transformation. The mockery and dismissiveness were replaced by cautious respect, then genuine curiosity about her background and abilities. Morrison, to his credit, became her most vocal supporter. He made it clear to anyone who would listen that Maria deserved respect and inclusion in all training activities. His change of heart was so complete that some soldiers suspected he was overcompensating for his earlier behavior. Chun and Walsh took longer to adjust, but eventually came to appreciate Maria's quiet competence and extensive knowledge. They began asking her questions about weapon maintenance and marksmanship techniques, discovering that her expertise went far beyond what they had imagined. The other soldiers in the company heard about the 800-meter shot and began seeking Maria out for advice and training. Word spread that Santos could teach techniques not found in standard manuals, and her quiet corner of the armory became an unofficial classroom for advanced marksmanship. Wilson officially requested that Maria be assigned as an assistant marksmanship instructor, a role that finally matched her actual capabilities. The request was approved, And Maria found herself teaching the same soldiers who had once mocked her. But she never spoke about Operation Silent Thunder, never explained the full extent of her training, or the nature of her previous assignments. Some secrets were meant to stay hidden, even when respect had been earned and trust had been established. During one training session, a young private asked Maria about the most difficult shot she had ever made. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes focusing on something far beyond the training range. "The most difficult shots," she said finally, "are the ones you choose not to take." The private looked confused, but Wilson understood. Combat experience had taught Maria that discretion and restraint were often more valuable than marksmanship, no matter how advanced. 6 months later, Maria received new orders. Her reassignment had come through, and she would be leaving Camp Harrison for a classified posting that wouldn't appear in any public records. On her last day, the soldiers who had once mocked her organized an informal ceremony. They presented her with a plaque engraved with a ricochet shot pattern and a simple inscription: Santos, the quiet professional who let her actions speak. Morrison, now genuinely respectful, made a brief speech. "We learned more from Santos in 8 months than we learned from ourselves in years. She taught us that skill doesn't announce itself, that respect has to be earned, and that the most dangerous person in the room might be the one you never notice." Maria accepted the plaque with characteristic grace, saying only, "You're better soldiers than you think. You just needed to learn to see beyond first impressions." As she packed her gear and prepared to leave, Wilson pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Santos, I know I'll probably never see you again, and I know you can't tell me where you're going, but I want you to know that having you here made this unit better." Maria nodded. "They're good soldiers, Sergeant. They just needed someone to believe in them." "Is that what you were doing here? Building them up?" Maria considered this. Everyone deserves a chance to grow. Sometimes they just need the right kind of challenge. As Maria walked away from Camp Harrison for the last time, the soldiers she left behind had learned lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. They had learned not to judge by appearances, not to mistake quiet for weak, and not to assume they understood someone's capabilities based on first impressions. Most importantly, they had learned that true skill often came disguised as humility, and that the most valuable teachers were sometimes the ones who taught without words, demonstrating through action what could never be captured in manuals or lectures. The 800-meter shot became legend at Camp Harrison, a story passed down to new soldiers as both and warning. Inspiration to never give up when faced with impossible challenges. Warning to never underestimate the quiet ones who might be carrying secrets that could change everything. And somewhere in the classified world of special operations, Maria Santos continued her real work, protecting others from shadows they would never see, using skills they would never fully comprehend, carrying responsibilities they would never have to bear. Because that's what the quiet professionals do. They serve in silence, excel without recognition, and disappear into the next assignment, leaving behind only the echo of impossible shots and the memory of respect finally earned.